Zig on the top. Today on the show, we have Harvey Gold, multi-instrumentalist, singer-songwriter. You might know him from a few bands. Tin Huey, the HiFis, Half Cleveland, and most recently, Golems of a Red Planet. Harvey and his band Tin Huey were one of the pioneering original rock groups based out of Akron, Ohio, sharing the scene with bands such as Chai Pig, Rubber City Rebels, and Devo, just to name a few. Also with acts from Cleveland such as Rocket from the Tombs, Mears, Electric Eels, Bizarros, and Kent acts such as the Numbers Band. Tin Huey got signed by Warner Brothers and released a record called Contents Dislodged During Shipping. Warner Brothers, not sure what to do with the creative genius and bizarre sounds of Tin Huey, shortly ended their contract. The band would continue on, fizzle out, then reunite, putting out another album called Disinformation. Throughout the conversation with Harvey, we go through that story with more detail. I want to talk a little bit more about Golems of the Red Planet, Harvey's most recent project, in which the band takes heads from John Zorn's Masada and makes them into surf rock songs. It's really well done and really cool. We're going to listen to a track. That was the track Zism, the band's Golems of the Red Planet. You can get all the tunes on Bandcamp. Also, while you're there, you can check out Harvey's solo record. It's messy. We talk about it quite a bit at the end of this interview. Lastly, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast and any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Harvey and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Harvey Gold. Into it, I wanted to start off about asking you about rags and playing organ with rags.
Okay. Well, as I described them at one point, Rags was a fairly psychotic band. I guess now one might call it a jam band, but it wasn't a blues-oriented or, acoustic hookah or Fish kind of jamming. It was pretty angular, pretty thick, pretty atonal, and interestingly, when I joined them, I think a lot of the organ parts in the beginning sounded a lot like something, and it's hard to remember because it was a long time ago, but I think probably something akin to the organ part that John Cale did on Sister Ray. It was just sort of giving a line through while Mark would go off on some sort of really crazy Les Paul shredding from Jupiter, and poor Stewart could keep drumming for however long this was going. We joked that Stewart actually needed a coffee IV when he was playing with Rags. And so that was it. I mean, it was really a very, very short term that I played in Rags, but because of that connected up, it gets mentioned because it gets connected up because it's segued right from Rags into Tin Huey.
So, like, with you were playing organ at that time, but did you start with piano and organ?
I started playing piano when I was 7, and just took your sort of standard issue music book 101 kind of piano lessons for about 5-6 years. It was when I was 12 years old, my brother came to me on my birthday and said, Dad's going to be really pissed because he had gone out and spent $5 on a used Harmony archtop for me. And Dad was pissed. He thought, well, you and those mop tops making all that noise, you're not going to practice piano anymore. And I was like, no, Dad, really, I will. I promise, I know. And I lied. I didn't. So I sort of drifted away from piano until that period around Rags where, because Mark's big brother Steve was in a band that actually did an album for United Artists called Wild Butter, where they practiced, where we were, there was, I think it was a Farfisa, sitting around. So that's where I was like, oh, Harvey, you can play organ now.
So jumping from piano to guitar, did it make sense? Because, like, I see piano as kind of like an overview of everything kind of musical. Like, you can really see it laid out, and guitar is kind of blocked, kind of like a city. Like, there's like little, you're moving these shapes to where it needs to go. Was the transition between the two easy for you, or did you find it difficult?
That's a real interesting way of viewing it. Seeing things in shapes and sort of a geometrical view of looking at it. Some people say that piano is the easiest instrument in the world to play a little. Hence chopsticks.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay.
And that it's possibly the most difficult instrument to play really, truly well, depending upon where you're setting the bar. Going to guitar was, in some ways, it was easy because of what music I was trying to pretend I could play. You know, there were at least 3 songs that if I played 2 adjacent strings and just barred them going up and down the neck, I could pretend I was playing. One was Louie Louie, one was Twist and Shout, and one was Hang On Sloopy. And they were all just 1, 4, 5, right? Yeah. So, and you could do it low with the low E and the A string, and you could do it up high with the B and the E. So you could do it, 2 different ways and feel like you were really covering the guitar. That's it. I mean, guitar just kind of came naturally to me. But yeah, it was the way everybody else did. Then you start learning chords, and then you realize that this old harmony archtop is going to make it really, really hard for you to learn how to play bar chords and actually have them work, because the action was so high. But and then I just kept playing guitar and took some classical guitar lessons, spent a little time at the university actually as a classical guitar major, and with my minor in piano, and then moved on from there and became a utility infielder, which is what I actually always felt like I was with Tin Huey and with Half Cleveland.
Okay, so like while going to college and stuff, was that when Rags was happening, when you were jamming with those guys, or was that before?
No, that was oh boy, that's tough.
Or vaguely.
Vaguely, yes. Yeah. I had a cup of coffee in college, and so that I'd have to look at a calendar to figure out when I started playing with Rags, when Rags ended, when we started doing Tin Huey, but it was in that period.
Okay. And when Huey started, were you sticking with the organ, or did you switch to guitar at that point?
No, I was playing guitar. Okay. I didn't own one. I still didn't own one. Whoa. I didn't own a keyboard. At some point, I had an apartment down by the university, and my father rented a Baldwin Spinet for me to play, which my roommate and I completely covered in cardboard, because we knew that we were going to destroy it if we didn't, and it was a rental, and my dad would kill me, so it was kind of a cute instrument. But as far as playing in a band with anybody, no, we were playing guitar. We were doing things like early T-Rex stuff. Some early, I actually can't remember what else we did. We were writing some songs, but the only cover stuff that I remember that kind of gave an indication of what we were doing was like the Ride a White Swan album by T-Rex.
Okay. So, 2 questions. Did the cardboard help? Did it hold up?
Well, it kept us from spilling a lot of Pepsi on the finish. Yeah, it did help.
Smart thinking, too.
As my roommate, he was smart. I would have destroyed it and just gotten in all sorts of trouble.
Were bands like the Stooges and Soft Machine and Velvet Underground kind of influencing you guys as well?
As we went along, absolutely. The Velvets had yet to release their 3rd album, so we didn't have any what I considered to be songs that we had really latched onto of a softer nature with them. And when we were acoustic, it was just 2 acoustic guitars, and Stuart was playing, percussion and bongos and stuff. I'm not even sure whether he had a drum kit down in the basement at that point. But when we went electric, we definitely started moving towards that. I was a big Stooges fan, big Velvets fan. So that stuff started to come into play, along with a lot of European stuff. Big fans of Soft Machine. That, of course, Soft Machine and some of the Velvet stuff didn't really start coming to play in earnest until I actually did get a keyboard of some sort. Not that I always played keys on all those songs, but especially with Soft Machine, which was, at that point in time, it was a three-piece band, which was, mainly organ, bass, and drums. So we did a bunch of that stuff. We started listening to a lot of bands like Faust and Amandul and Henry Cow. The kind of radical left wing of Canterbury music. Henry Cow and Slap Happy, Art Bears. It got pretty weirdly eclectic. But the one artist that has stayed consistently in mine and a couple of the guys from the Hueys, absolutely at the top of the list throughout all these years, has been Robert Wyatt, who started as drummer for Soft Machine, and then Matching Mole, and then as a solo artist.
So how were you coming across these artists? Like at the beginning, who was showing you them? Like,
well, we two things really happened. One is I had a really, really great pal who was just completely immersed in musicology, and he turned me on to some stuff. He turned me on to the night that I listened to the White Light, White Heat album, and it actually just sort of like changed my trajectory from that point forward. And then I worked at a record store called Disc Records, which was a chain at Summit Mall, and it was a bunch of guys with long hair wearing ties and may or may not have been doing acid at any given moment. And it was very, very much like, the atmosphere was like a sophisticated version of the record store in High Fidelity, except it was in a mall and it was wearing ties. We were getting lots of really interesting imports from Gem, which meant we were also spending a lot of time with, I was at least, with like electric English traditional, like Fairport Convention and Steel Eye Span and the Straubs, and then Father and Gay, and everybody who was involved in it, Richard Thompson and Sandy Denny and Linda Thompson and that whole gang. So that was there too. So this explains why when we talked about Tin Huey, or really kind of talking about the arc of my career, is that if you are what you eat, boy, we ate a lot of different things, and it meant for some pretty eclectic song lists.
It got messy.
It got messy. It did. Believe me, I came to the title of that album by listening to the tracks, putting them in some sort of what I thought was a reasonable order, and thinking, this is me. I'm just messy.
But that's beautiful. There's so much from music to take from, especially when you're using it as your creative outlet, right? There's so many things from so many different like styles and pieces and composers and voices, and like it to be pigeonholed has to be a bummer. You know what I mean? Because there's so much beauty around.
Well, I do consider it the secret to my lack of success. I really do. It's like, I was actually thinking about this. I've been doing a project, like in the last week or so, where I have been sort of reimagining the Warner Brothers album that Tin Huey did, and a bunch of unreleased material in the studio, doing some stuff with it. And I was thinking about the song that Chris and I wrote, Pink Berets, and how my thinking was that people would buy our album because of Pink Berets and some sort of weird suggestion of Steely Dan. And as a result, they would then have to be stuck listening to all the twisted tunes like Puppet Wipes and Squirm You Worm. And I thought of it as being like sort of insidiously a guerrilla operation.
Sneak attack.
Yeah, of course, nobody wanted to hear Pink Berets. Nobody wanted to hear I'm a Believer. Nobody actually wanted to hear the album, so we weren't able to poison the universe with it.
But I like the kind of, so when you guys started writing, right? When you started writing your own songs, and that was before Chris joined, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, we released a bunch of stuff before Chris joined, yeah.
Right. So, like, leading up, I guess, being exposed to all this music, having all this outlet, input, right? And, like, a group to put it out with, like, was it a process that came naturally? Was writing easy for you? Or was there being around all this kind of, sometimes when you take too much in, there's kind of like a pressure of something to like live up to? Or did that, you know what I mean? Did that kind of mess with, here's a song, let's try it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we had any trouble writing. How well developed the tunes were, it can always be questioned. You know, I think a lot of everything changed just simply as we became better on our instruments. I have a line that I wrote on a song on our Disinformation album that is in the Tin Huey Story Part 2, which says, let's see, back in basements, sneering in Milwaukee, being weird to keep from being bad. You know, if you did something really atonal and strange and abrasive, and you did it with enough confidence and volume because we were really loud to appear to be intentional, then the fact that, you know, I couldn't play half the things in the Mickey Baker songbook as far as chord structures doesn't become part of the conversation. You know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally makes sense, because there is something about that when you're watching like some like free jazz or something, and it's like you're like, I can't comprehend this because it's so much more intense than my brain can understand. And then like maybe you're stepping back, but part of that is the attitude, right? Part of that is someone being, this is what I have to say, figure it out, you know.
Sure. And to really answer your question, it was always an interesting thing that happened with us because of who the members of the band were. I have to say, there are times that I feel like a Zelig character. People who played in Tin Huey had such interesting and extreme talents. But it also sometimes caused deficits in terms of being able to, like, you know, play something that would literally crack the audience's skull open, but not ever be able to remember to go back to the G chord after that. Sort of savant-like stuff went on in Tin Huey, so I was sort of the broad shoulders that a lot of it sat on. I guess the point is that we would have this idea like, oh, let's do this song. You know what? This song could sound like a lot like, pick whatever you want. It could sound like I'm Duel. And then by the time we were done with it, it didn't sound anything like I'm Duel. Or, like I said, something like, oh, let's approach this like a Steely Dan song. By the time we finished it, it sounded nothing like Steely Dan because everybody was such a weirdo in this band.
But planting the seed and having it start like that,
Sure.
Yeah.
And it might have a little stylistic moment in it, you know, something that we just are sort of like, you know, hooking onto for a second, and that satisfies our need to sound like Fairport Convention, but nothing we did ever sounded like Fairport Convention.
And I guess that's how you really know it's yours, you know?
Well, yeah, and that's how you do get better, because you pick up little things from other stuff that you've listened to. And while you're never really going to be able to plagiarize, you it sends you down a path that you wouldn't have gone down otherwise. So that's always an interesting way of growing musically.
So after, I guess, kind of being in that, when did Breakfast with the Hueys? When did the first like batch of tunes like come together?
Well, right around the time they were released. I'd have to look that up on a discography, but we had songs, and then we always had some sort of a recorder around. Some of the stuff that was recorded on our first EP was recorded. The one that's just called Tin Huey was recorded on a TAC 4-track. Some of it where we practiced, some of it, one of them live, and some of them at a little studio down on High Street in Akron that just simply had all the gear was attached to a 4-track TAC. And then a little later, by the time we got to Breakfast with the Hueys, Mark had, and my single Experiments, Mark had acquired an Otari 8-track. So all of a sudden we had 8 tracks to work with, which was quite the wealth of tracks. And we were able to experiment on that.
So like at that, like, I guess going at one point, I wanted to ask, I think his name was Jim Kaufner. He introduced you to, was it?
That's who I was talking about.
Okay.
My friend who introduced me to White Light, White Heat, and a bunch of stuff, because he had worked at Disc Records also, had actually gotten me a job there at that point.
Okay. Because he's got
an old high school buddy.
Right. But that's who influences like the band, that's who gets you into the things you never thought you would ever love or get into or inspired by.
Yep. I think we referred to him as our guru at some point, which, it's a pretty interesting way of putting it.
So, I mean, there's always someone like that. I mean, I haven't talked to anyone really who's mentioned like the krautrock bands, like you've mentioned so far. Because I don't know. It's really I guess a niche rabbit hole, but that whole like experimental scene over there is really cool.
It's interesting. I mean, there was a period where we would play this really, I guess, I just wish we had, I don't know whether I actually wish we had a recording of it or not, but we were known to start out doing Sunshine Girl, Rainy Day by Faust, which was, a real patterned, pulsing tune. And we would do that for about 10 minutes. And then we would segue into doing, We Did It Again by Soft Machine, which was completely written and based by them on what effect it would have on people by being so repetitive. And so we would end up doing, in front of a poor live audience, 20, 25 minutes of this stuff. And it was kind of abusive, I think. But, we kind of liked that, so.
Was it where, and now, like, at that point, where were you guys playing?
Well, we had a gig 3 nights a week for a while at JB's in Kent. The story's kind of funny because the guy who ran the upstairs bar there, a fellow named Mike, was a big Grover Washington Jr. fan. And if you know Grover Washington, he played kind of soft jazz.
Right.
But he was a sax player.
Yeah.
So when he knew that we had a sax player, he wanted to hire us. And it didn't matter that the sax player happened to be Ralph Carney and the band happened to be Tin Huey. That was the only thing he used as criteria. So, damn the torpedoes.
The saxophone music has to sound like that. What else could it be like?
I don't know.
That's quite
it was pretty funny
too on his end to keep it up. You know what I mean?
Well, there wasn't a lot going on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in Kent, and the Numbers Band were usually playing downstairs to a pretty good sized audience. So we would just bring in our 5 or 10 people throughout the night and do whatever the hell we wanted to do, and then split the take at the door, which would leave us with probably about $5 each, and go home.
I understand that feeling, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those like that opportunity and that just the platform to get on stage and figure it out, is like that is so valuable. Like to be able to
it was really useful. First of all, if we as musicians ended up in some sort of variation of that, Beatles in Germany, 10,000 hours, and suddenly you actually become a player, sort of theory, then JB's was really just like a godsend for us. Because there were not a lot of places to play in Akron, and certainly not a lot of places to play for a band like ours. So doing the JB's thing was great. Plus, then Chris joined, and he and I had kind of a really interesting chemistry, and we just started writing and rearranging stuff and looking at our sets, and I just really welcomed having a little less chaos in the band, and then we played these gigs, and suddenly we're getting signed to Warner Brothers, which was really pretty bizarre and interesting. But we had JB's to be able to showcase. We had kind of a home there, and so when Robert Christgau was coming in from the Village Voice, there was a place for him to see us and the Bizarros play on a given night. And then when Karen Berg came in from Warner Brothers, there was a place for her to see. We had a home. We weren't like scraping and searching for a club where she could see us and whoever played with us on those nights. Chai Pig played one night with us, I think, and Unit 5 played another night. So it was great having JB's in our life at that point.
Definitely having an HQ like that, and kind of like just being able to see what other bands are doing too. Like, because the Numbers Band were pretty experimental in that whole blue. I mean, they had a pocket, in like a form, like. But like as far as like a standard blues band, what's going on there?
No, it's interesting. I have 2 things to say about that. One, I had no idea what any other bands were doing. Mm-hmm. None. I was working. There was a point where and it's been resolved over the years, but there was a point where one of the members of the Rubber City Rebels in an interview said something to the effect that Tin Huey were a bunch of like prog rock snobs because we didn't come down and hang out at the Crypt. And I took issue with that because I was working 40 to 50 hours a week, had a wife and a kid, and then was playing 3 nights a week at a club and practicing the other nights, so fuck you, basically. And actually, one night I was doing a gig, I don't remember, I think with Half Cleveland somewhere, and Buzz Click from the Rubber City Rebels was in town and came over and said, yeah, sorry about that. Because, we were killing we were young, so, you can do anything, but we were, certainly killing ourselves, working jobs, paying the bills, doing what we were doing in our civilian life, and then putting in all the hours we were putting in with the band. So I didn't hear anybody else. I'd hear Chai Pig a little bit because of however I approached what was going on when a band was opening for us. I'd hear Chai Pig a little bit. I'd hear the Bizarros. I remember a tiniest bit of Unit 5, although they opened for us on a couple of occasions. I remember Rocket from the Tombs because they were pals and we played with them up in Cleveland. I certainly remembered that. Mirrors really stuck with me. I really liked Jamie, and I liked his style. But I've just kind of named all of them right now. I didn't really spend much time even hearing Devo until both of our bands were starting to get ready to sign to Warner Brothers. And, we were finding ourselves with a little more time because we were going to be getting advances and we wouldn't have to work 40-hour-a-week day jobs for a while. So that... And I never heard the Numbers Band because I heard that Bob Kidney was real mean, and I was scared, and I wouldn't go downstairs. I swear to God. I knew Dave Robinson, the drummer, because he would come up and hang out when they were on break. I've met Chris Butler because when they were he was playing bass for him, and when they were on break, he'd come up and heckle me personally while I was playing. And that's it. Harvey, call your mother. Yep, that was him. And that was about it. And I kind of became truly best friends with the Kidney brothers and Terry Hind, who sort of wanders into my driveway with some regularity. Usually he'll call ahead, but when I get a call on a Saturday morning and it comes up Terry Hind, I'm like, are you in my driveway now? Because I'm in my bed. And he's like, no, but I was going to take a drive in the valley. Fine. I'll see you in a half an hour, But just the Numbers Band are my favorite band. When they are on, there is nothing like them. That dark voodoo, weirdo music that's definitely blues-based, but angry blues. I mean, I just love them.
I mean, they're like diving into their music. There's something that is so alluring with how they create this groove and then the narratives that are put on top of it. And I saw for the first time I got to see them, which was the New Year's Eve, and like for listening to them forever, and then getting to see it, like it's still there and it still is intense. Like, and like I don't know if Robert's mad that I'm here, but.
I know.
He's not. He's just so. Like, I believe what he says when he's saying it. Like, I'm sold on it, man. Like,
well, he's committed. He's committed to it. He's a real artist. And as far as it goes, he said to me, this was a while ago. He goes, Harvey, people come up to me in between sets and there are times that they think that I'm nasty and I'm aloof and I'm deaf. And I don't hear them, and so I don't respond, and they think I'm a shit, which I think was pretty funny. But he is pretty deaf.
That I did not know. All right, that would make sense. Well, I mean, you be around music forever, you know what I mean? Unless you're wearing earplugs, you're going to have some hearing loss, man.
Yeah, he likes to play just about as loud as I always did, so and he's done it more than me for a longer period of time, so I would expect that.
And like I've talked to a lot of people from the scene around here, and like the Numbers Band is put on such a high pedestal for right reasons, right? And like it's
that's because they're better than everybody else,
right? But they're just so
they
good.
They just are. They really are. They really are. I mean, the stuff that Terry and Jack do on harp and saxophone is just spectacular, and it's really deeply based on understanding what they're doing. I mean, they really know what they're doing. Jack was talking to me about what he does on the harp that's a little different than other people do, and the technical proficiency is remarkable, and then the writing and the soul and the absolute crazy combination of emotional and physical talents that Bob has is just it's just crazy. It's crazy. I was telling Terry that I want to order the piano music, knowing that I'll want to kill myself, but I want to order the actual piano sheet music to Giant Steps by John Coltrane, and have him come over and see whether we can do a duet. That would be terrifying. But, we may do it. We may do it.
I hope you do, because that'd be insane. Like, it definitely is like one of those workouts as far as like trying to keep up. Like,
well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the piano player on that recording was out of his mind, and he wanted to like kill himself during that. So, but he did what he did, and it's been transcribed. So I want to take a look at it.
And he's got like when you listen to that, you can hear he's taking pauses to like figure out where to go next.
Well, I mean, how many key changes are there in the first minute and a half? I mean, Jesus. I mean, if you're the piano player and you're like, I do not know which sharps and flats are applicable at this very moment. You just don't know.
That's like the most.
It was like I was playing Jimmy Bell's Back in Town, sitting with the Numbers Band. It was the first time I sat in with him on piano, and Terry just keeps looking at me, and he keeps looking at me, And I had approached it by thinking that Jimmy Bell was sort of like the Numbers Band's version of Sister Ray. So if I was going to be playing a keyboard, I just sort of approached it that way. And Terry afterwards was like, It's a major key. Why were you playing a G sharp? Why were you playing a G sharp? And I was like, well, I was resolving from the G sharp to the A. And he's like, no. And I was like, yes. And we sort of laughed about it. And the last time I sat in with him, it was a pretty hot version that came out. And I've been playing a lot of piano since that first time I played with him, just in terms of frequency. And Terry was like, wow, you really played that well. And you didn't play a G sharp. I was like, yeah, well,
but
thanks, Terry.
But with Giant Steps, that part to me is like the human, approachable mortal on that record that's like, okay, we can all figure this out. If that guy's struggling, okay, all right, there's some hope for the rest of us.
Exactly. I'm thinking that when I look at the music, it's going to be like vaguely simple because he was just trying somehow to, be a piano, very, very clearly the piano being a percussion instrument, kind of try to like make his way through it. So it'll be interesting. I look forward to it.
Thank you. So moving from that, right? You guys are playing, and then Chris sets up those gigs with, and then Jerry Wexler shows up, right? And that's how the Warner Brothers thing comes to.
Well,
fruition?
yeah, the Warner Brothers thing really. It started with Chris Gow. He was doing a piece. He was overseeing a piece for the Village Voice that was called Down in the Boonies. He sent one of his writers down to Austin because of Dwight Twilley. He sent another one to Minneapolis because of Husker Du. And he came to Kent. And that's when I met Bob. And he saw us and then called and said, I never have done this before, but I've told my friend, Karen Berg, who is A&R at Warner Brothers, about you, and she's going to get in touch, and she's going to want to see you. So then Karen got in touch, and we set up another huge gig in Kent. And these were big gigs, where Tin Huey had often played in front of 10 or 15 or 20 people. These were JB's upstairs packed to the door, really good, big turnouts. But we had really pressed to get a big turnout. And then Karen came, and we did our first set, and she took Chris and me aside and said, do you guys have a lawyer? And we said, why, no, we don't. And she said, well, I don't normally do this, but I'm really good friends with David Sonnenberg. And I would, of course, you should go with anybody you want to, but I would recommend that he would really look out for your best deal. And because Warner Brothers, I'm going to offer you guys a record contract. So we proceeded to go up and tell the rest of the guys in the band. And then we went up and played a really, really, really out of control, shitty second set. And we thought, oh my God, are we going to lose this chance? Because we were like so excited,
right.
We were just like insane. But, and then a couple weeks later, Karen came back and brought Jerry Wexler and Michael Austin, Mo Austin's son, and who was president of Warner's at the time. Mo was, and Paul Wexler, Jerry's son, who ultimately ended up producing Contents Dislodged, becoming a lifelong friend. And that was kind of a sequence of events. Jerry had just become head of A&R for Warner Brothers New York, and Warner Brothers New York had never signed a band before. It had always come out of Burbank. And Tin Huey had the good fortune and the bad fortune of being the first band signed by New York. So,
I mean, yeah, I'd imagine being ecstatic after that. Like, how do you go back to like just being focused for the rest of the gig? Holy shit!
No, that didn't work.
Incredible.
And interestingly, the nicest thing that Jerry Wexler said about our band was that he was impressed by the fact that we were in tune.
Thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I
appreciate it.
Yeah. But was there any thought, like, wasn't Mark, the bass player, wasn't his dad a lawyer?
His dad was a judge.
A judge. Okay, I got that mixed up. I was going to say, why don't you go with that guy? You knew him.
No. And there was a very big difference in our perception of what there were no entertainment lawyers in Akron, And Sonnenberg was interesting. He managed Meatloaf. He was the lawyer for Patti Smith. He was the one who ended up becoming executive producer of that Muhammad Ali movie about his fight with Foreman that won the Academy Award. He was the guy who raised all the money to make it happen. So he's kind of an interesting guy.
I mean, that's like a whole nother realm of trying to figure out people like people like that who got your back and your interest, but clearly someone who's like willing to dive into projects like that could get behind what you guys were doing.
Well, he did, but only to a point. We actually wanted to get him to manage us, and he wouldn't do it. He just felt he didn't have the time. And for all I know, he may have thought, these guys are really weirdos. I'll represent them as an attorney, and I will fight. I will go to battle to get them the best possible deal, which he did after we told him what we thought we should get. But no, he wouldn't. We never really had what I consider to be anything in the lines of real management.
So,
and that didn't help.
Okay, yeah, because that's a whole nother like can of worms to understand and try to like managing and then booking and like handling all that while having all this like as far as like a record contract and everything to like uphold. I imagine would be a lot. As like it's exciting and like it's a step of success, but also trying to navigate all like the business end of things. Like I'd gotta imagine would be very confusing at first.
It had its. I mean, Chris and I were pretty smart about certain things, but it was only as smart as we could be, and it would have been useful to have some other stuff going on. But again, we were a pretty strange band.
So when you guys do get signed, when do you open for television before or after?
Yes, it was before.
Okay.
It was before we went in to record the album.
Okay. So how was that?
Karen, well, that was one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah?
I mean, it really, truly was. It's where do you go from there? Karen had signed television to Elektra. Television were her babies when she was at Elektra Records. And then she went on to Warner's where we got signed. So she arranged for us to have the gig opening for television. And opening for that band with Richard Lloyd, the original band, and it was the last gigs that they were playing before they would break up. I mean, obviously they got back together in a couple different forms over the years, but they to be able to, I mean, fine, playing the bottom line in New York was cool. Knowing that there were people in the audience that we were kind of, who were people we admired, you know, that were hearing us. I know that I think Eno was there at one point, Fripp was there at some point, David Byrne was there. That was all cool. The real juice was getting to see television play that set 6 times in 3 nights. I mean, I've never experienced, I had never and never will experience anything like that. I had been a television fan, but you know those 2 albums are really kind of brittle sounding. You know, I mean, there's great stuff, but from a sound standpoint, they sound, the word I use is brittle, you know, and you go in and you're standing in front of that stage, you're standing in the wings, and you come to realize that what the fellows that are playing that material live are a big-ass, loud rock band with a couple of amazing guitar players. And they just blast all that stuff that you had really, really liked, you know, at you while cracking your skull open. And it was spectacular. It was spectacular. I mean, hearing Marquee Moon 6 times, you know, having them open the show 6 times with Ain't That Nothing. I mean, it was just the best. It was the best.
That's so cool. That's interesting, like, observation. Like, a lot of times with records, you have to round out some of, like, the lower ends, like, especially with guitar, so the, like, bass and the kick drum kind of cut through, so, like, to really get the full effect of it. That sounds incredible. Did you get to mingle with the dudes?
You know, I did not. I've probably to a fault throughout my lifetime, I do not tend to seek people out because they're like, if I'm in a professional scenario, you know, we're playing that night, they're playing that night, I avoid acting like a fan. So, and they were, you know, that was a period where at least a couple of them were doing a lot of smack, and that I knew. So I was just sort of like keeping my distance. I mean, since then, I met all of them. I have a very funny relationship with Fred Smith because of some projects that he and I have both done. And I do have an open invitation. Dolly and I have an open invitation from Jimmy Rip that should we ever decide to come to Argentina, we have a place to stay. So, and I had a lovely conversation with Verlaine the one time that I spent with him. And so, you know, that's since then, yes. Oh, and Richard Lloyd is the first person I ever blocked on Facebook, but that's a whole other story.
Didn't Chris record on some of Richard's stuff?
Well, Richard, I don't think he recorded on any of them, but he went on the road with Richard
Gotcha. Okay.
as his drummer on a couple of occasions.
Right. Oh, okay. I thought it was that's sick though. Like you're gonna be showing up in in Argentina and be in his driveway.
Well, it could happen. You know, I mean, there are times when you go, well, wait a minute, Jimmy lives down there. Maybe we should go see what Argentina's about, you know. But I suppose it could happen. We do some traveling. But yeah, it was great. It was great getting to know Fred. And of course, peripherally I was around Billy Ficca because of Chris and the Waitresses. You knew that, right? That Billy was his drummer, and yeah. But yeah, that was a big night.
So that's all before
big 3 days
to record this record, right? So like you're riding into this recording session from that, like. Yeah,
not long after that. Yeah, recording the album was a really interesting experience.
Well, now was Paul. So he produced. So was he there during all these recording sessions? And like,
yes.
Okay. and like with like the weirdness that, I mean, when I listen to your guys' music, I hear really complex, like there's like like bits of so many different genres kind of happening at once, and very complex as far as like the structure of the tune. I'm like, okay, this would take some studying to get right. So when you're working with a guy like that in a session, and then Paul's there, like, how is he like helping navigate like the weirdness and the complexities? Or were you guys all ready and he just kind of like, I'm over here, just letting you guys do whatever?
Kind of. Yeah, I mean, he could help where in places where he could help. You know, he might suggest something with the miking or something. But he even said that we were such a departure for him that he almost quit halfway through it because. And he says this with love.
Yeah.
He just said, Harvey, I just didn't know what to do with you guys. You know, because we were pretty strong-minded. And how do you ask? And I think your point is well taken. How do you ask a band to tweak something that's coming from a place where you really don't know whether a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn is really the appropriate thing to do with that? You know, it was really unconventional stuff, you know. So, yeah. But as I said, he's a lifelong friend, and he's been to my house in Ohio, and, you know, we've spent a lot of time in his place in L.A., but we were pretty strong-willed, so we kind of did what we did.
Well, I feel like...
Which is, you know, in retrospect, you know, that's good and that's not so great, so...
Well, I mean, you stuck to your vision, and like, that's, you know, and especially with anything that's kind of coming from an abstract place, or like kind of going back to like, if you play this noise with enough attitude, it seems like you meant all those notes. You know what I mean? Or the lack thereof.
Well,
notes.
by the time we got around to doing the album, there was intention in just about everything we did there. You know. So that made it even harder, you know. It's not like, hey, why don't you try playing it standing on your head, you know. But when we did our second album, the one that we put out 10 years later, Disinformation, there were a few songs that Chris Butler helped produce and a few songs that Robbie Sabino helped on. Robbie was the keyboard player for Chic, and so he ended up doing a bunch of the keyboards on like the Let's Dance album. And there were like suggestions and things that came into play. I mean, we were certainly more structured band. I described the Disinformation album as being one that, to a large degree, when we would talk about how, well, we grew up with the Beatles and the Stones, and we were huge television fans, and we also loved our Soft Machine and Captain Beefheart, Captain Beefheart. And so there was all this stuff, but this album, we're actually working in more conventional structures because that's also a part of what we've eaten and who we are. And it'll be fun and interesting to be maybe a bit more of a guitar band, you know, more of a, it's hard to explain, I guess, but that we don't have to be incredibly insidiously weird at every turn, which we had really previously taken great pride in. You know, our feeling was that if we had seen somebody starting to tap their feet, we should probably put in a 5/4 rhythm shift right there, because why are they tapping their feet? You know, so with Disinformation, working with some slightly more conventional forms, there were times that a producer would say, you know, I think this would work better if you didn't repeat that particular move another 4 times. Let's cut to the chase, and certain things that would really help tighten things up. And it was interesting, and it was revelatory hearing the idea, then doing it, and seeing where it helped. And that's supposed to be what a producer does. You know, it's like, I want to, if there are 5 of you who have busted your asses to make this as good as you can, let me be the 6th guy that's coming in with fresh ears and helping to take it just another half step, you know.
I definitely think if a musician's producing it, that direction can be maybe a little clearer, more clearly understood and given.
Yeah, perhaps. You know, I guess it's always going to be a horses for horses thing. It's going to be who is it and what are you guys doing with producers. You know, I mean, I think that we were really trying hard at first when we were looking at different producers for Contents Dislodged. We were trying to get Jimmy Iovine because of just the general sound and the dynamic. We thought that he could bring that he had done, like on when he engineered Born to Run. We thought, you know, he could conceivably bring some more meat and more of a conventional kick to the sound of us playing all this crazy shit, you know. But he wasn't available, and we liked Paul, so we went that route.
And I guess at one point, Captain Beefheart was around?
Well, he came into the studio to pay a visit, but partially because we thought that it would just be the biggest feather in our cap if we could get Captain Beefheart to guest on our album. And there is a harmonica solo in, I'm pretty sure it's the song Slide on the album. And Don came in and sat down, and he listened to what we weren't sure that he was going to be coming in. So Ralph had already laid down a harp part, and Don listened to it and said, "Nah, it's really good."
Damn. Damn.
Yeah. Well, it was probably better harp than Don would have played. Ralph was pretty spectacular, and Van Vliet was also, you know, a strange and angular talent. But he hung out and we talked for a while and smoked cigarettes, and it was a great experience because I had already been ruined by seeing Captain Beefheart shows, and it was great. It was great. I will always. That's another highlight. You know, if I really am pushing and thinking of highlights of my career, it always, like I said, it's like being a Zelig. You know, it's like having those moments with other people that I really admire.
Like hanging out with him, was there any kind of like lessons or like just like kind of philosophies that you gleamed from the brief time?
Oh, hell no. He was sitting next to me. Excuse me. And we had, you know, the set, the engineers had the set sheet, the album order of songs taped to the mixing console. And he flips it up and he looks at it and he goes, "Puppet Wipes? Why would you want to call a song Puppet Wipes? It sounds like something Frank would do. You should call it Puppet Lights." At which point I said, "But then, Don, it would sound like something that you did." And he looked at me and went, "And?" And I thought, yeah, I get that. No, not at all. He was not helpful, but it was so weird. It was just so weird and strange a thing to be hanging out with him, because keeping in mind that somebody that I had shook his hand at a gig one time, and but you know, never really had talked to him. And when you think about the fact that your impression of this creature that's sitting in that room with you is the person that created Trout Mask Replica and Clear Spot and Spotlight Kid, I mean, he's coming in with a whole lot of ammunition in a way. And so And I say this because at one point, again, he had one of those responses when Michael, I think, had said something to him about all the guys in the band Mallard who had been one of his Magic bands, and they had quit, and he and was talking about how great they were, and Don said, "Well, they couldn't have been that great, could they? They left me, and you're like, okay." So then at some point, we're just sitting there, and there's like this brief moment of quiet, and all of a sudden he goes, "Anyone want a camel?" And we're all thinking, I swear to you, we're all thinking, he's saying some really fucked up thing about a camel, sort of like the end of Clear Spot where he went, Webcore. And we have no idea what's happening. And then he pulls out a pack of Camels and offers us cigarettes. It was like, we were completely nonplussed.
Well, with a character like that, the mythos that follows all these records and all these songs, you're like,
I know. I mean, you just said you asked a very, very normal question, and everybody is thinking that, they're hearing some historically weird seer-like thing, and all he was doing was offering you a smoke. So
that probably followed him around, like.
Yeah, I think so.
So also, like, during this period, you meet William Burroughs too?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
We were, you've been paying attention.
I know who I'm talking about. I've been getting ready, man.
Jesus. We had done the album for Warner's, and none of us, including Warner Brothers, none of us ended up liking the mix. And so some of the guys from the band went back to Akron, and some of us stayed in in LA. And we had been, when we were making the album, we had been living in these, short-term transient apartment rental in Toluca Lake. And so those of us who stayed on moved into the Tropicana Hotel, which was historically a notable hotel in that there was a period of time where Tom Waits lived there and kept his piano in the kitchenette. And one morning, because we were remixing the album at the record plant, and one morning, Jim Kaufman, who you had mentioned, knocks on my door and wakes me up and says, "You got to look at this. There's this guy walking around the swimming pool. He looks like William Burroughs." And I stuck my head out the door, and I see this guy this is L.A., it's maybe late October, early November, but it's still L.A., and he's wearing like a three-piece suit with a fedora and has this clearly a 19-year-old red-haired boy following him around while these other people in a camera crew are taking pictures of him around the Tropicana's swimming pool. So I said, "Jim, that doesn't look like William Burroughs. Who the fuck do you think it is?" So I threw on a pair of shorts and a shirt, and I went out, and as I was approaching him, I remember thinking of him as in a very scholarly way, because I was a huge fan of his stuff. And as I got closer and closer to him, I started seeing an image in my mind, which was a headline. Actually, it was a big banner headline in one issue of what was then the Soho Weekly News, and it was an article about him. And what the headline asked was, "Is this really a mammal?" Because he was really, really amphibious as a creature. And I got up to him and started speaking to him, and I asked him what he was doing in L.A., and he lied, and he asked me what I was doing in L.A., and I didn't lie. And finally, at the end, as we were talking, I realized that by seeing stuff that I was reading, and because I became friends with William Bachris, that it was when Bachris was doing the book, Burroughs' Life in the Bunker, which was largely about the time he spent in New York living in a defunct YMCA behind like a million locked doors, was taking pictures for that book. But my favorite part about it was that I said to Burroughs, listen, I really can't not get your autograph. But, I'm here, and I only have 3 books with me right now, and I don't imagine you'd want to autograph a book by Henry Miller or Delmore Schwartz. And he responded, you are correct. And I said, well, the only other book that I have was sent to me by my wife for my birthday, and it's a pictorial called the Goodyear Blimp Book. And he said, that'll do. So I am the owner of a rarity. I still have it. It's the Goodyear Blimp Book with, regards to Harvey from William Burroughs.
So
that was a great experience.
That's so cool. That's like the most like Akron thing.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It was, and again, like I said, once again, what are these great moments that I remember? And, those between playing with television and the Beefheart story and the Burroughs story. It's like, I just managed to somehow, whether I was doing anything notable or not is almost irrelevant. It's these encounters that have been really kind of spectacular.
Well, I definitely think if you are doing something, it's notable. And if you're doing something that is notable, you find yourself around notable people, even if they don't take a note of it. So
okay. Thank you.
I'll just put that there. You're out in LA, you're mixing, and you're hanging out with William Burroughs. Sounds pretty notable to me. But anyway,
but see, my viewpoint is that it's Harvey from Akron who just happened to, by circumstance, be staying in this shitty hotel on Santa Monica Boulevard. So, I don't know. Anyway, it was pretty funny.
And is that when you're out there? Was that when you and Chris met Frankie Valli with mixing?
No.
Okay,
but I will say that when we were at Warner Brothers Studios doing our album, I didn't do this, and I had forgotten about it because I think Chris probably just walked in and said blah 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 blah, but he was going down the hallway to go to the bathroom and ended up having a really nice little conversation with Prince.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. But I mean, I have to admit, back then, when I think of Prince's first 2 albums, they are albums that I really like, but I went back for them. I wasn't current with what Prince was doing, but Chris knew who he was, told him how much he liked his album, that first album, and he says this little guy with this like really tiny guy with an afro. And they had a very nice, cordial conversation, but I never got to meet him. Although Ry Cooder stopped in ever so briefly, just like opened the door to the studio, said hi, waved, and left. So that was nice. But, I think he was stopping in to say hi to the engineers, who he knew, But yeah, that was all kind of interesting. No, the deal with Frankie Valli was that after we had left Warner Brothers, we wanted to finish up, and we ended up releasing a single on Clone called English Kids, and the flip side was a song that I co-wrote with my pal Chuck Keith called Sister Rose, and we were at the what was it called? House of Music in, I think, West Orange, New Jersey, mixing it. And while we were doing that session, we had a brief meet up and handshake and oh my God moment. meeting in, you know, probably in the coffee room meeting Frankie Valli, who was this little piece of leather.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was not a big guy,
Yeah.
and he was, you know, just sort of a leathery little Italian guy. It was really nice. He was very sweet.
Were you living in Woodstock at that point?
No, as a matter of fact, while we were in the studio, my wife Kay at the time was actually almost on the verge of putting down a deposit for an apartment up in Washington Heights in Manhattan for us, when I got a call from Michael and Stewart, who had driven with Ralph up to Woodstock to help him move there, and had called me and said, if we all move to Manhattan, we're crazy. We have to move here. And they argued, their arguments were great. And so I told Kay, hold up. And the next weekend after I came back from Jersey, the next weekend she and I drove up to Woodstock and looked around, and it was pretty magical. And we ended up renting a house and moving there.
Okay. And so at that point, the first record's out. Were you touring or wrapped up touring when you made that move?
At that point, we had done a little bit of touring. We never did any real substantial touring. Most of the stuff that we did was around the East Coast and the Midwest. And again, management could have used it. It would have helped, but it was. So we had tried touring. The album sales were what they were going to be. The airplay was what it was going to be. We had an interestingly semi-contentious series of conversations with some business affairs people at Warner's, and they ended up buying out the rest of our contract. So by the time we did English Kids and Sister Rose, we knew that we were no longer on Warner's, and we were planning on what our collective and individual next moves were going to be.
Okay. Was Clone, was that Nick from Bizarro's label?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's Nick Nicholas. Really important guy to us. There were not a lot of independent record labels back then, and he was one. And because of the independent stuff that we had put out, including Chris, because he put out a single and under the name The Waitresses way back, of The Comb and a song called Clones. And that actually had an influence on us asking him to join us. That was all stuff that made its way to people like Robert Christgau and to Cream magazine and to Trouser Press, and had these various rags sort of making a little bit of giving us a little bit of an acknowledgement for what we were doing.
One thing that I really admire about the Ohio scene is there's so many characters and people who bring it up on their own, like carry that own weight, and Nick being one of them.
Absolutely.
And then I guess so. You're out in Woodstock. Is that so you're tracking with these other tracks? Is that when you start working with Todd Rundgren's video project as well?
Yeah. When I moved to Woodstock, two things were going on. One was Michael and Stewart and I had been the ones who ended up in Woodstock. Chris was close. He was in New York, and Ralph was also in Woodstock for a while before he moved down to Brooklyn. So we were sort of retooling where Tin Huey, what was going to comprise, rather. Actually, compromise is a pretty good slip. But what would comprise Tin Huey. And actually, one of the projects I'm working on right now is a bunch of tracks that we recorded in Woodstock back then that have never been released.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what question I was answering.
Working with, well, I want to know what.
Oh, well, Rundgren.
Yeah.
I had to make a living and pay the rent after a certain point. You know, the Warner Brothers money was going to run out, and so I got a job working as a production assistant when Rundgren was moving all of his video equipment from Studio B, I think it was in B, up at Bearsville Recording, Albert Grossman's place. He was moving it down. We were moving it to down the hill to a new building that Albert had built for Todd to put Utopia Video into. And so my job was just, grunt work, getting things schlepped in and wired. And I stayed on working as a production assistant on some productions of Todd's videos, and that's where I got to meet Ray Davies when he was in for a day, checking it out for a possible place to do a Kinks video.
That'd be cool. That's pretty sweet.
And of course, Todd, I mean,
yeah.
And I discovered that his drummer, Willie Wilcox, was somebody I could talk boxing with. So that was good.
Was it, I guess, did he, being around that type of production, like, was there any lessons from either, like, from Todd and how he ran it that made you, like, want to do Gold teleproductions?
Well,
or inspired, I guess.
Interestingly, the thing was that we when we left Warner Brothers, we started producing some demos because we certainly knew people in the business, and we were still in Akron at that point. And we went down this demo wormhole, which was, like Harvey Leeds over at MCA would say, "Wow, I really like that song out of 4. Let me hear more." So essentially saying, well, the 4 songs that you showed us didn't merit me wanting to give you a record contract, but I really dug that one song. And then somebody at Chrysalis, it was always a different single song they liked, but they wanted more. And somebody at Virgin, same thing. And so it became it got to a point where it was, we were suffering from demo fatigue. And that's when I was looking around in Akron and I was like, I love this place, but I can't write here anymore. I got to get out. And Chris wanted to move to New York anyway. And Ralph wanted to move to Woodstock because of Creative Music Studio. So we left and we moved to Woodstock. And then we did the same thing, but in that case, it was the band that gets represented to a fair degree on Disinformation. It was Michael, Stewart, me. Ralph played on a bunch of stuff, and then I think he's listed on the album as Ralph E. Boy, but it's Ralph Lagnini who ended up playing guitar with the band, and I ended up doing on the record mostly keyboards. And then when we were on the road, because we did a couple more tours of the East Coast and Midwest, I played bass live. Because Mark didn't move with us. So I became the bass player, which was also revelatory. As a musician, you can imagine going from playing keyboards and guitar and then suddenly finding yourself writing music from the position of the rhythm section. It really changes your writing. It was really neat. But that was a long, long circuitous way of saying then we suffered from fatigue with that version of the band, and I needed to make a living and had built up a resume. However many skills I did or did not have was less important than the fact that I could drum up a resume after working for Todd, and then ended up heading down to New York. And with my friend Bob Lampel, who was Todd's lighting director when the band was gigging, but he was also his production manager at the studio, who had preceded me to Manhattan and started his own company. I ended up going down and working freelance for a couple different companies, but most notably his, and that's what kind of moved me into television production. But it was really a question of just needing to make a living and wanting to have a career that didn't involve necessarily working in a deli. Although I really liked working in a deli. I really did. My ego wouldn't allow it, but I really did enjoy it.
Well, I get okay. It's on both ends of a thing. At least the deli, you know what's going to happen. Tom's going to come in, order the same thing. Like there's a comfort to it. But I get that.
Yeah, I knew that I was going to be serving chili dogs and Colt 45 to Rick Danko. This was Woodstock, mind you.
But so. I mean, okay, that makes sense. And it's really interesting, I guess, writing from a different perspective. Did you find writing from that rhythm kind of based perspective that form took a more grooved, like solid, like...
Yes.
I was going to say, did the form become simpler?
I mean, it wasn't necessarily funky. It wasn't necessarily funk. But the fact was that, a riff would strike me. And then, being a guitar player and a keyboard player, I could build the song from there. But starting, with something that was happening on the bass, or just being in that mindset, was really, really interesting. And a number of those songs are represented on Disinformation.
Okay. I'm excited that you're putting together these demos to put out something else. That's cool, man.
There were some really interesting things that happened. We recorded 5 songs it was a strange connectivity. A friend of ours, I became friends with him because of my work at Utopia Video. Chuck Allen was working as an engineer for Eddie Offord, who had been Yes's engineer. And Eddie had a studio that he had installed, like a 16-track studio that he installed in Levon Helm's house, which he had rented. So over in Saugerties, there was a 16-track studio that Chuck let us come in and record at. So we're remastering these things and doing things using some plugins to do some manipulation, because all we ended up with at the end of the day was cassette versions of the mixes. So we haven't been able to remix, but we've been able to pull some things out of them and spread out the stereo spectrum and make them start sounding like records. There are 5 songs we did there, and then some other stuff that we recorded in various places. A couple things, including a song I wrote minutes after we moved to Woodstock from Akron, called Woodstock, which was recorded with an ARP Odyssey synthesizer, an SM58 microphone, bouncing tracks back and forth between a Harman Kardon HK2000 cassette deck and a Wallensack cassette deck. It was like a real R. Stevie Moore kind of approach to recording, and I've got that there. That's pretty funny sounding.
That's cool. But, that's cool, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
So I guess during that time, as far as like everyone kind of starts doing their own thing, but then Ralph gets these like Ralph and Friends shows together. And then at one point when you move back to Akron, can you? Yes,
I basically took, I took a good 10 years off from playing music, or more. It was just a different life. I'd moved down to Manhattan. I'm really like, it's almost like going back to college for a grad degree in film and video. And trying to survive in Manhattan and meet some other obligations. So it was a pretty crazy period where I was doing very little. The only stuff that I ever did musically would be when I'd come back to Ohio to visit, and Michael and I would go up in his attic and record ridiculously weird shit. Actually, 2 of those tracks are part of these recoverable tracks that I have. But ultimately, I took a lot of time off, and when I came back to Akron, 2 things happened. I played Ralph came into town, and we did a Ralph and Friends gig up at the Beachland Tavern, same spot. And that was Michael, Stewart, me, Ralph, and Bob Ethington. And that was the first time Bob had played with us. And that was the night that the opening act was 3 songs from the Black Keys, which was pretty funny. Because I think it was like their second gig.
Yeah.
And I remember watching them and thinking, wow, that's really fucking good. It was really interesting. They were really good. And I was like, but I kept scratching my head going, Patrick's not a drummer. But there he was. And then right after that, Ralph, not long after that, Ralph was putting together a kind of a Ralph Carney and Friends thing in San Francisco to open for, which one was it? It was Les Claypool's thing, Colonel Claypool presents Bernie's Bucket of Brains, which was Les Claypool, Bernie Worrell, who we knew.
Yeah, really?
I had met Bernie at Rock in Rio in '91, and I think Ralph had met Bernie because Bernie ended up playing on what was the name of that band from Akron? Bob Pfeiffer's group. I'll remember it, but Bernie had played on an Akron thing. That's annoying to have that leaky brain at this point. But at any rate, and then Buckethead was playing guitar and Brain was playing drums. Anyway, so I flew out there and I played like bass and keyboards on a set that we did opening for them. And then I came back and we got a call from Meredith at the Rock Hall asking us if we could pull Tin Huey back together to headline a Northeast Ohio punk show with the Pagans and the Pink Holes. Yeah. And while we were not a punk band, well, neither was television, but hey, what are you going to do, right?
Right. Well, I was gonna say it's kind of like the Minutemen. You know what I mean? It's punk in its own way. You know what I mean? Like punk is being in that.
You're
way.
Right. I mean, exactly. Some of it had to do with style rather than substance. Some of it had to do with timing. Some of it had to do with venues. In our case, it was the period of time that we were functioning, and the one thing that really did distinguish Tin Huey. And that's one of the reasons why Karen Berg signed us, because she thought that we would build a following with our live show, is that we may have been what was later revealed to me. I know this sounds crazy. I did not know this until Robert Christgau wrote the liner notes for this album, the Smog Veil album, Before Obscurity, the Bushflow tapes. That said, I don't normally like bands like this. And what he was saying was we were a prog band. And I never thought of us as a prog band, but as I go back, I think about it. And, when you were talking about like all the complexities that we had, we were a band that was playing prog music, except we were doing it at 120 decibels at 400 miles an hour, which was very punk. I mean, we brought the fact of how much I loved playing TVI, to what else we were doing. So I guess I understood that, but that's what kind of got us going again. At the morning after we played at the Rock Hall, Chris and I went up to Kent and we practiced it in my driveway that morning, playing guitar, and I borrowed a little baby Casio keyboard from Stewart, and we went up to this benefit that was being done for some sort of thing that had to do with Kent State and May 4th at the Beachland again. And Chris and I did 3 or 4 songs as a duet, a couple of his songs, a couple of my songs, and decided that this was a good idea, and ended up calling it Half Cleveland, and that started that band, which went on for more than a couple of years.
Are you guys still doing Half Cleveland stuff?
No.
Okay. I really like
No.
that live cut from the Tri-C art rap program live album you guys did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Tommy Wiggins asked us to come and do it because it gave his class a chance to record a band under vaguely controlled circumstances. So we did this at Tri-C in their Wi-Fi cafe, their little computer cafe. And the students recorded it, and we gave some notes, and most of the notes didn't really go through, but the kids mixed it. And then a while later, I thought, you know what? There were some really, really good performances by this 4-piece band. And it was especially a couple of Chris's songs that were really nuts. And it was really interesting that we were doing it as a 4-piece. And it was like a very just odd cocktail band. And so we decided to remaster it and release it.
Was it the very last one was a really wonky one, the country western one? that one was cool.
Oh, Idiot Trail.
Yeah. That structure is all over
I got to tell you, I loved playing that song, partially because on the original that Chris did, it was the one time where he actually wrote, and he brought in somebody to help him put it into, help him chart it, wrote a string part. And so I got to sort of play the string part on keyboards, or a version of it.
Yeah.
And I always loved that. It was a real, sort of a Roy Rogers-y kind of cowboy song, which I just loved playing. I've always loved the challenge of playing songs that Chris wrote.
But I think that's a really cool a balance of working with another songwriter who's as out there as you are with stuff. You know what I mean? Like it was a cool counterpoint to hear after listening to the Tin Huey records and listening to the Chris stuff. To hear oh, okay, on this one, I think maybe he's taking more of the lead. You know what I mean? Right. At least with that first record, Tin Huey record.
Well, the main thing about Chris is that he's brilliant, and he comes up with these parts and these guitar parts. I mean, that was the thing for me one of the things I really took away from being with Half Cleveland was that there were times that I had to teach myself and get a little help from him to learn guitar parts that were, because he was so unbelievably structured that, there were riffs in there and guitar parts that were really just key to the way the song drove through. And so it's the same thing as wanting to get the sheet music for Giant Steps. It's like when you're forcing your fingers and your musical consciousness to take on stuff that if you were just leaving it to where you would naturally gravitate, it just changes what you do and what you can do and what you hear, because you would not normally play like that. And that's kind of fun. Sort of like it's like guys who were in cover bands forever. Well, they're ending up playing other people's licks. And I just was in a band, may he rest in peace, because he just passed away, Denny Coyle, who was in this band, the HiFis, with me. And he had spent a career playing in cover bands, but oh my God, you'd come up with a song and you'd kind of get a sense of what the style would be, and Denny would come roaring in with the most brilliantly played appropriate guitar part for it. It turned him into just a serious guitar hero. Once, all that playing and all those cover songs and all that stuff distilled into, well, what does Denny do? It ultimately ended up becoming, this is what Denny does, and it's fucking great.
I guess it's the cool thing about any, I guess, creative endeavor is there's endless things to learn and endless ways to learn how you do what you do. If it's art or if it's painting or if it's music or if it's baking, whatever. And that idea that drilling yourself on this thing eventually leads to self-actualization or like being able to say what you want to say because you've heard someone say how they want to say it, you know. That's like that's the mythos of,
and
like,
it helps give you the tools to say what it is you want to
exactly,
say.
yeah. The High Five group was really good. And you were mostly doing keys on
it
that?
was interesting. What's that?
You did mostly keys on that, right?
Yes, it was an interesting, it was a great and grand experience for me. For one thing, I was able to get back together. I was still in half Cleveland when I started sitting in with the HiFis because the bass player, Michael Hausman, who had also played with the Bad Dudes, was hounding me to come and play with them because Chuck Keith and Denny Coyle and I had a band way back in like 1971 or 72 called Willie, just for a short period of time. We did one gig. But Chuck and I were roommates. We were housemates. And on that piano that was covered in cardboard, co-wrote the song Sister Rose that was done by Tin Huey. And I said, well, if you can get Chuck to leave his house, I'll come play with you guys. And he got Chuck to leave his house. And one of the best things about the HiFis was absolutely was the social component of it. But while I thought they were, these were all songs that were written by Chuck, who was an incredibly clever songwriter, and had a beautiful voice and a good guitar player as well. And what it allowed me to do when I said that I was like a utility infielder in all my bands. I was like, some songs I played guitar, some songs I played keyboard. A good half the time I was fronting the band, I was singing, I was writing, I had all those things going on. With the HiFis, it was almost exclusively me getting to try and become a better piano player. And it really was a wonderful opportunity. I kind of went into that band thinking, well, they're fun, it's kind of poppy, it's kind of, it's not the kind of stuff that I used to do. But I thought, okay, so my goals here are to see, when I look at a song of theirs and I'm going to come up with a piano part, I would say, what would Nicky Hopkins or Bill Payne of Little Feat do here if they only had like 15% of their actual ability, which is how I figured that was my baseline. And it just really helped me become a better piano player. And sadly, by the time we lost Chuck and Denny, and therefore the band vaporized, we were really good. I mean, I was in earnest. It felt like in some ways it was playing with a band on almost a Little Feat level. Denny's guitar playing was always spectacular. The songwriting was varied, but it was always clever. Rich Roberts, our drummer, who, came from Chai Pig and was an original member of the HiFis, was just a killer drummer. So it was like it had become like a really, really good band. It was kind of like, well, we've all played long enough that even if one of us makes a misstep, the rest of the band is so good, they've got you, they've got your back, and they're just going to run right through the song, and nobody's going to know. It was that sort of thing. And I have to also say that playing with the HiFis was the only band I've ever played with where I could actually say that every single gig we played live in front of an audience was just a total joy. So musicians don't get to enjoy it that kind of run,
Well, and when you're like with Tin Huey, where it seemed like there was a lot of extra pressure from like trying to make this a success, you know what I mean? Like like all those other things factor into like just enjoying the gig and make it being smooth. I guess it also being kind of, I don't know if you were running or managing this group as much as just kind of being in it, So also kind of just being in it.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, I would help because as a keyboard player, I could definitely contribute a lot in terms of arrangements and I knew what I knew, and these are my friends, so certainly if I can contribute, I will. But still, it was all from the standpoint of sitting in front of my Nord and my Korg and just doing it, trying to make my contributions from being a piano player, which was great.
Is that at the same time were you doing Golems of the Red Planet?
Well, then Golems came after that, and that excited me because the thing that the Golems allowed me to do was almost purely, at least for a time, concentrate on nothing but my guitar playing and composition, and be able to stretch some of those muscles that I used in Tin Huey compositionally, because we were dealing with such a strange project and strange universe.
Did you initially, did you find the Zorn Masada book?
No.
Or who brought that to you? Okay.
The bass player of the band, Mark Allender, is a total, he's our absolute in-house Zornophile. He's created a website about Zorn. He really, really has just loved what Zorn has done. And he's our connection to Zorn, because Zorn has heard all the stuff we've done and has responded about it. Yeah. And he's had some pretty fun responses. But Mark is the one who will come to us and say, okay, from the Masada, here's some stuff that I've got that I think will work for us. Because he had the idea originally of it being using the Masada material, which is all, minor third stuff coming from like Ashkenazi Jewish folk modalities. He felt, and he had this idea, and you can understand how a guy from Tin Huey would react to that when he goes, and I think we could probably do that as a surf band.
Yeah.
So my reaction to it was, wow, that's fucked up. I think we could do that, and I don't like surf music, so that makes it even better, So anyway, so it was his idea, but it was up to me to put the band together. And so I got Bob Effington to play drums, who was totally into it. And I thought, if we're going to do this, let's make it really interesting. And I thought what would be really fun to do would be a John Zorn-based surf band with a cellist. So I asked Matt Reese if he'd be interested in doing it, and he was. So that's how it became the four of us.
All those tunes sound really good. You guys did a really good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I was after we met at the Beachland, I dove into the whole band camp with all those singles. I was like, man, these are so well done, and started to dive into apparently John Zorn was in a surf band for a very brief time in his life when he was super young.
But no kidding.
Yeah. So you guys might be tickling his heartstrings with doing this in the surf style. That's
that's interesting. The thing about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, did he mention that at all when responding?
He never mentioned to me or to us in any of the stuff that Mark shared with us that he had been in a surf band. But he has really, really liked everything we've done. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been the last one we did. He thought that he heard a little Ennio Morricone in it, and that is one of his heroes. So he especially liked what we did with that one, even though that was never the plan or the intent. And I thought, oh, okay, I know what part you're talking about. Oh, okay. I had no notion. But that band has been really fun because, when you go through the Masada, you see that what he wrote, if all you do is play what he wrote, all of your tracks are going to last for about 40 seconds to a minute 10. And most of the stuff that has been done from the Masada and by the band, the Masada Band, involves a lot of, most of it, not all of it, but, and by other people, are jazz people. And so you run through what he did, and then you get a sax solo, or you get a piano solo, or something to that effect. There's a band that does nothing but vocals, and you get a vocal solo section, which is cool. I mean, some of the stuff's really good. But what it does is it affords you the opportunity to say, what kind of style do you want this one to have? What sound do we want to have here? What can we do to make this different than the others? And that's where I get a chance to, write these little sections. If John gave us an A and a B, I'm writing the C, or a C and a D, and turning it into whatever we turn it into. Like Mark has done the heavy lifting in terms of taking the material and distilling it to a place where he can actually write out the music and maybe do like a MIDI oriented interpretation of it for us to use as a starting point. And then, a lot of the compositional part ends up falling on my shoulders. And then, Matt comes in, and it's kind of a combination of playing cello parts that I've written for him or that Mark originally wrote, and then him just coming up with stuff, which is usually maybe we heard a version of it in practice, maybe we didn't. And then we're in the studio, because the intent of this band was to be a studio band. We have a lot of reasons why, especially at the time when I was in another band and had other projects going on, and people have various things going on in their lives. And if we were going to depend on coming up with enough songs to play a live show, by now we would have broken up. This is just something that takes time. And the nice thing is, even though it doesn't always work that way, and the intent was to say, if we're not worrying about playing it live, you know this, when you're in a band, you write for the band. It's like, well, we've got 2 guitar players and a sax player and blah, blah, blah. And so you write it and you arrange it for those people. And what I'm saying is, what I wanted to do is that if we're doing it in the studio and we have an infinite number of tracks that we can put on, let's try and experiment and create stuff.
Right.
Not being dependent on 4 of us, or maybe 4 of us with 1 extra person playing it live. So that makes it a different approach, which is kind of fun.
Right. Well, it makes it a whole, the studio is it's a whole, you expect more of a lush, kind of well thought out piece. At least I feel when a band codes into a studio, you're looking at a more thought out version of what they're trying to say compared to maybe what you would see live. Live, you're going to see who's there, Yeah,
I sort of see it, like the way Andy Partridge, approached XTC. It's like when we're in the studio, I could try all sorts of stuff. And, sometimes you find stuff works, we don't have an unlimited budget. But the thing is, I've also got a little Zoom 16-track recorder where we practice. And so we can, between the 4 of us, we can try little things here and there and see how they work. So it just sort of becomes a process. And interestingly, people have asked us about playing out, and I've started thinking about it. I'm like, if we had a 5th person who was kind of a utility infielder also, to where places where I have double-track guitar parts and I've got, a 5th person, we could play actually most of these tunes. Not all of them. Some of them it's been just no, we'll leave that one alone. But it's been great. It's been great. And I love the guys. The people in the band are terrific. So it's there's a social component to that that's really lovely. We get together to practice, and we probably spend the first hour and a half talking rock and roll crap, sitting around eating peanut butter pretzels and drinking. And then we go in and, like, you know, knock off a whole lot of progress on one of these tunes in like a half an hour or 40 minutes. And then I'm like, well, I don't want to stand here anymore. We're done. And then, you know, but that's why we've been doing this for, I don't know how many years, 3 years now maybe. And we have how many songs down? 8 songs, 9 songs,
I don't know. I got to recount.
Yeah. I think it's 8.
But
we did a really cool video with that my wife edited.
I don't know if I
did
saw
you
that.
notice that?
I don't think I saw that one yet. No.
Okay. So if you go to, hold on one second. So if you Google Golems of the Red Planet, and it'll give you a website, an actual website called Red Golems, something. And when you go to that, you'll see that one of the options on the homepage is it's called a jukebox. If you click on the jukebox, it gives you all the songs, all the, you know, the streamable songs that are on Bandcamp. They're just links to the Bandcamp page. And then there's also you'll see in the corner, there's a video for the song Mahalalel. And I think you might find that really fun.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that's cool about the Masada is like how it kind of takes like Jewish music and like kind of revamps it. But what I think really works nice with surf music is like Jewish music kind of has like this like tendency of like the harmonic minor that you know what I mean? And like Dick Dale Miserlou is all that, you know what I mean? So that fits
absolutely
really well.
And that was Mark's point. You know, he was like listening to all this Zorn stuff, all this Masada stuff, and he's like, I could hear almost every one of these done as a surf song. And my problem with surf music, I was a little flip about it. I'm not a surf music fan, except when I really like something that's great. For instance, Chris used to play in a band called Purple Kniff, and he's the drummer, and they're really, really good surf band. And I loved them. And I have a really good friend, Dave Rich, who recently, and keep your eye out for this, he's got a new band called Dave Rich and His Enablers.
Okay.
Which, first of all, is a great name.
Yeah.
And his bass player is David Giffels. His other guitar player is Friday Mike, who played with Chris and me in Half Cleveland. And Chris is the drummer. And it's really interesting. They do like 1 million songs. You know, he's a big Guided by Voices fan, but he had a band called the Beyonderers who put out 4 or 5 albums, and they were like real just slash and burn futuristic, that whole sci-fi future surf kind of band. And I loved them. But the bottom line for me is that I love them. I loved both those bands for like 3 songs, maybe 4. And then I have to leave. I'm done with it because it's a kind of a narrow genre. I mean, it's got some wonderful moments of genius throughout history, and there are a lot of little variables there, but that's what I like about doing Golems, because while I really want to retain in every one of them, every one of the tracks, some sort of surf sensibility, it could just be playing a Fender Jaguar through with a lot of reverb, or it could be just the fact that it has a real spacey sound to it. I don't feel that it's necessary for, and obviously you're a musician and you could hear that in what we were doing, that we're not being really like consistently super faithful to an instrumental surf band.
Right. Well, I mean, there's even parts where you guys drop into like a Middle Eastern, like there's like a drone like you would hear over like Indian classical music, like really dive into that tonality.
Bob actually has, yes, Bob has even studied. He's studied tabla.
Yeah.
And that song that you're talking about one of the things that happened was we mixed it and I remixed it. And one of the things that I said was, this song is all about the rhythm section. It's all about the drums and bass. Because before it goes into that tabla section, you've got this really booming, if you have the drums up hot, which we do, and the bass, it's just the whole song. It doesn't matter what I'm playing and what Matt's playing. It's just there's this big roaring, like boom, 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 boom. And it's just, it's almost like a march of the elephants. And that song, when Bob said, what if I did a little tabla in the middle? And I said, why don't we make the whole middle tabla? And I got on my Korg and came up with those we actually had a sample of that drone, and we made sure it was in the right key. And so we just sampled that drone in, and then the little things above it that are kind of like little sitar-ish kind of sounds were just things that I pulled off on the synthesizer, on the Korg. But yeah, stuff like that. That makes it fun. You listen to it and you're like, whoa, that was an interesting decision.
No, it's awesome. And I like, and it fits with that. I don't know. It fits with the tonality and that kind of, so I get what you're saying. It's like you're nodding the hat, the surf music when it's needed, but also not, and,
yeah. I mean, you try and you sort of hope that maybe you can make something that you want to make, but you have at least a toe dipped in there somewhere. Even if it's just your pinky toe and it's barely dipped into the stream, you're there somewhere. At least your mind recognizes that where you are, what room you're in.
Right. That's a good way to put it. It was, and I find what's interesting with these last three kind of projects we talked, or these last two, you're working on your keyboard skills in one set, you're working on your guitar skills and your composition skills, and really kind of isolating those two skills and focusing on them in different projects. When it came to It's Messy, was that you were honing into songwriting? Because that was 2020, or what?
Well, Chris and I both put out, we had talked about doing a half Cleveland album. And for a variety of reasons, we never did it. And for a variety of reasons, including that, is why maybe we stopped doing half Cleveland. But he did an album right around close to the same time he was working on his. Which was a bunch of songs. This is kind of weird, but, we are of an age where, as I said with It's Messy, I had a bunch of tracks and songs that I had written that had yet to be recorded, some that had been recorded, different combinations of musicians, where I thought I would rather be the person to make sure these are mixed and mastered rather than somebody else after I keel over. And it doesn't mean it's the last thing I was going to do, because I've continued on, but it's been playing with the HiFis, doing stuff with the Golems as a solo album now. This was me saying, I don't want these loose ends out there. But because it was a bunch of stuff from various times and various configurations, it was messy. That's kind of why it happened that way. And Chris put out that was one of the last releases from the Smogvale record label. And Chris did a solo album called Got It Together, where the T and the H in together are reversed. One of Chris's moments where he gets to chuckle at himself. But that was kind of the same thing. Those are all songs between those two albums. 4 of the songs that are on my album, I actually took the guys in Half Cleveland, who I'd been playing with, into the studio and recorded them. But it wasn't for a Half Cleveland album, it was for my album, because those are my songs. And I ended up playing organ and doing some backup vocals on Chris's. So, it wasn't that it was from a period of time where I was still working as a songwriter, as a singer-songwriter. Golems came after that, all of those tracks. The HiFis, I might have just been starting to dip into sitting in with them when I was recording the half Cleveland band, I'll call it, the half Cleveland band tracks for that album.
Okay. Like one tune in particular that really stuck out to me was In Consideration for Joe Strummer off the solo record. That was really cool, man.
Yeah. Thank you. I was a big Clash fan.
And they're
I was a big actually that song is less to me Clash and it's more Mescaleros if I was going in any direction. I mean, I loved a lot of the stuff he did with the Mescaleros as well.
Yeah, no, speaking of like genre bending, like, or the like not living up to the identical punk plug and play, like the Mescaleros and the Clash are right there. They're all over genre wise, you know.
That's a really, really strong point that you're making. It's kind of funny when we were doing our album in L.A. A friend of Wexler's, a friend of Paul's, came over, and he had a cassette with him. He had been in England, and he'd been hanging out with the Clash in the studio, and they were working on what was the second album? Give 'Em Enough Rope. And that was one where who was it? Templeman was producing it, who had done the Blue Oyster Cult, and apparently Strummer and Templeman were fighting tooth and nail about where Strummer's voice should be in the mix. Strummer liked the idea of the punk aesthetic, which really was sort of represented in his mind by the fact of being really, really loud, usually playing gigs where the PA system is not able to keep up.
Right. So buried vocals.
So he wanted his voice to be more of like one of the instruments and more in the mix. Not crazy. I mean, you heard the album. But he didn't want it to be way up front like, say, Blue Oyster Cult vocals were, which is what Templeman wanted to do. And so this guy came back with a cassette, which was a mix of that album in advance without any vocals on it. And we listened to it tons. And I grew to love this album. And then it came out, and I was like, oh, my God, I know these songs, except there was Strummer. But, the Clash was notable for that. I was really, I don't think this speaks well for me, but I was not real welcoming to punk when it came out. I had been a Stooges fan. I had been an MC5 fan. And of course, these days that's defined as pre-punk. But I'd been to see the Stooges, and I'd seen Iggy, and, this was very punk-like. But I thought a lot of these punk bands were just sort of reductive posers. And I was kind of like an old man asshole about it for a while. And then the Clash came out. Well, then I saw the Ramones, and I thought, oh, my God, this is like watching an episode of the Flintstones. This is so cool. But, which it really was. But the Clash came out, and I thought, oh, my God, these guys actually have a musicality to them. I mean, they're still absolutely devastating. And in a way, it reminded me, it didn't then, but it does now when I talk about like Tin Huey being a prog band, but playing at 140 decibels at 300 miles an hour. It was like the Clash did not neglect the idea of melody and harmony. I don't necessarily mean harmonies, but harmony, and a musicality that really informed this stuff they were doing, that made it really, really interesting. And there was a dynamism to them that you hadn't heard in punk. They certainly didn't live the world of, if it's more than 3 chords, you're not a punk band anymore. They were wonderful. yeah, and especially the Mescaleros, where he really did start dealing with, a lot of international flavors and how he wrote and how he produced these tunes. So yeah, I loved him dearly, and I don't even know, it started with that guitar riff, which to me was like something straight out of Motown, and then it just kind of went from there. I wrote this song for Joe.
It's a great record, man. So one thing,
Thank you.
What with Smogvale, I was following them for a while, and they seem to have just fallen off. So what do you know the story behind that?
Yeah, Frank didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay. All right, that's simple enough.
I mean, I'm in touch with Frank all the time, and he's a great guy. And the last really big project was Peter's. The box set, and he did the box set. He released Chris's album. He released my album. And while the box set was starting off, he released, before obscurity, the Bushflow tapes for Tin Huey. And when he was actually, one of the guys that works with him was starting to, on his own, put together what he wanted to do as a similar sort of retrospective, all-inclusive box set of Tin Huey, to which I always said, really, why? But that's what he was doing. But Frank just got burned out. He didn't want to run a record company anymore.
Okay.
So
all right,
that was it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess it's better than
he's enjoying his life. It wasn't like they went out of business because they didn't have any money left or anything like that. There was no drama to it. He just wanted to sort of retire from that business and move on to whatever his next chapter was going to be.
That's cool. It's better to know when you've had enough, you know what I mean, being able to step and walk away as opposed to
sure, because I yelled at him a lot about it. I was like, stop it, Frank. But no, he's happier now.
Harvey, man, I really appreciate your time. We've been chatting for a minute, and I've been really enjoying this conversation.
I've enjoyed hanging out too. I just have no idea what you're going to turn this thing into.
Well, it's a podcast, so. But I wanted to ask you one more thing, and I meant to bring this up earlier, and I guess kind of talking about the box set. So Peter would hang out with you guys in early Tin Huey rehearsals. Can you kind of tell me?
Yeah, it's like when we were at the Beachland, and I asked Stella, Charlotte, trying to remember things properly, because I remember, I know that Peter used to hang out in the basement when Tin Huey was rehearsing, because he was a big fan. And obviously there was a certain connectivity when he was doing his one band Cinderella with our friends Debbie and Sue. But I also remember going to dinner, having dinner. I don't even know whether we were going out to dinner or did that and had dinner over at my house. I don't remember, but I just remember, a certain amount of socializing with Peter and Stella, and then going to the Stooges show where they were opening for Slade together. And so I was trying to place it. And yes, I guess as she said, for a few months they were living in Akron. And that was, so that was pretty much the sum total there. I imagine if somebody were to tell me that there were a couple times when Peter was down in the basement that we'd start doing a Velvet Underground tune or something and Peter would grab a guitar and play with us, I don't remember that, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised by that, because he was pretty busy of a human, pretty kinetic, But that's pretty much the sum total of it. I mean, I've told the story about, at the Stooges show, turning around and throwing a punch and realizing that I had just punched Peter down into his seat. But that was almost like the whole story right there, because the Stooges only played for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because Iggy was really late getting onto the stage, and he was filled with two-and-alls. He had the Stooges had played, this was in the winter, I think it was in, January, but the Stooges had played the Fillmore with the New York Dolls, and Iggy at one point had slipped and fallen backwards and had kind of cracked his skull. And he also had a bad tooth, a really bad tooth. I didn't learn this till later, because the next day he went from Cleveland to Ann Arbor, and his dad picked him up and took him to the dentist. But he had arrived in Cleveland and had just done a whole bunch of two-and-alls and went to bed and wasn't waking up, and they had to do that, lovely cinematic. We have to get the hotel detective with a master key to go into the room, and they dragged him out of bed and threw him under the shower and dressed him and brought him to the show. And that was very apparent. He was pretty messed up, but especially when he was hanging from the microphone stand saying, "I am the world's greatest dancer." But because of curfews and so forth, the Stooges, and I've been, it's almost like you wait your whole life to see the two Ashton brothers and Iggy and James Williamson. And they played like 20 minutes, and then they shut the power off on them so that Slade could come out. And I was not a Slade fan. And all I heard, we were also, some of us were really drunk. And because there had been a bottle of whiskey on the way up. And I heard a voice behind me, and I thought it said, I'm sure he said, "That sucks." But I was under the impression he was saying that the Stooges sucked. So I turned and threw a punch, and it turns out that it was Peter sitting behind me who also thought that it really sucked that they only played 20 minutes. So that was pretty funny. That was funny. Everybody was fine. He went on memorably to go to the the Iggy Pop post-show party and meet all these incredible people, and I got myself, shoveled back into a car and taken home. So
that's wild, man.
Yeah, it was fun. Stooges were great.
Yeah, well, that's it is a bummer. It was only 20 minutes, but man, I guess leaving up to the insanity, it was right there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But man, I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me, and I've always looked up to you and Chris, and so this has been very cool. So thank you, man.
It was great fun. It was fun hanging out holy shit, hanging out for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Jeez, I just looked at the clock. I'm probably going to have to go pee now.
We made it. We made it.
We did. So thanks, and let me know when it's going up.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.